For Elara, his past was a blank page. He was a man born from the sea, a gift from a storm, with no memories, no name, and no identity beyond the love that grew between them. She healed his body, and he healed her lonely heart. He was her storm, a gentle soul in a powerful frame, and their life together was a perfect, quiet truth. But a blank page can hide a terrible story. The man she fell in love with never truly existed, and the man he truly was, a ruthless pirate king, was not just coming back to reclaim his memory. He was coming back to claim his fated soulmate. The village of Siren's Rest was a place the world had agreed to forget, tucked into a crescent-shaped cove on the rugged, uncharted coast of the Northern Isles. It was a quiet haven of fishermen and farmers, a community whose greatest ambition was to see the next sunrise. And in this quiet corner of the world, Elara was the keeper of its heart. She was a village healer, a woman whose knowledge of herbs and poultices was a legacy passed down through generations. She lived in a small, stone cottage overlooking the sea, a place filled with the scent of drying flowers and the weight of profound, unspoken loneliness. The sea had given her a purpose, but had also taken her parents years ago, leaving her an orphan in a world that felt both vast and incredibly small. Her life was a rhythm of service, a cycle of healing the small wounds of her neighbors. She did not dream of adventure or romance. She dreamed of peace, of a life lived without the sharp edge of loss. She did not know that the sea, the great taker, was about to give her something back. The storm that brought him was a legend in the making, a wrathful god that tore at the coast for 3 days and 3 nights. When it finally exhausted itself, it left behind a shore scoured clean, littered with the splintered bones of a great ship. And among the wreckage, tangled in rope and sailcloth, was a man. Elara found him at dawn, while searching for storm-tossed ingredients for her remedies. He was face down in the surf, a breath away from being reclaimed by the tide. He was a canvas of injuries, a brutal gash on his head, a dislocated shoulder, and a latticework of cuts and bruises covering a body built for war. But as she gently rolled him over, it was his back that made her gasp. Covering nearly the entirety of his skin was a magnificent, intricate tattoo of a dragon, its scales rendered in breathtaking detail. But it was unfinished. The dragon was coiled as if in battle, but its opponent was missing, leaving a strange, empty space in the design. He was alive, but barely. With the help of the village fishermen, she moved him to her cottage, a place no man but her father had ever entered. For a week, he was a ghost, a body without a soul, hovering in the gray twilight between life and death. She set his shoulder, stitched his wounds, and forced bitter, healing teas between his lips. She watched him day and night, a keeper of his fragile flame. She studied the lines of his face, a face that was handsome even in its unconscious state, but with a hard, unforgiving beauty. This was not a man who had known a gentle life. When he finally woke, his eyes were the color of the sea after a storm, a clear, stunning gray, but empty of any tide or current. They held no recognition, no memory, no past. He was a ship without a rudder, a man adrift in the sea of his own mind. "Where am I?" he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "You're safe," she replied softly. "You were in a shipwreck. Do you remember your name?" He tried. She saw the effort in his eyes, the desperate search for something, anything to hold on to. But there was nothing. "No," he said, the word confession of utter loss. "I don't remember anything." He had nothing, so she gave him something. The storm had brought him, so she called him Storm. And in the weeks and months that followed, she gave him a life. As his body healed, his mind remained a blank slate. He was like a child in a man's body, learning the world anew through her eyes. She taught him the names of the constellations. He taught her, through an instinct he didn't understand, how to tie knots that would never break. She taught him the gentle art of gardening. He, in turn, revealed a preternatural, almost frightening skill with a knife, carving exquisite, lifelike birds from pieces of driftwood. He was a paradox, a man of gentle actions and warrior's instincts. But the gentleness always won. He became a fixture in the village, his immense strength used to help mend roofs and haul fishing nets. But his true place was at Elara's side. He was her shadow, her guardian, a quiet, constant presence that filled the lonely spaces in her cottage and her heart. The villagers saw the change in her. The quiet, solitary healer now had a light in her eyes, a smile that came easily to her lips. The love between them was never a decision. It was a simple, undeniable fact, as natural as the turning of the seasons. It was in the way he would leave a perfect wildflower on her pillow every morning. It was in the way she would soothe him when he woke, shaking and sweating from nightmares of fire and screams he could never recall. He was a man haunted by a life he couldn't remember, and she was the only anchor in his storm-tossed mind. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, he turned to her, his gray eyes full of profound, unwavering adoration. "Elara," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I do not know who I was. I do not know what sins my hands may have committed in that forgotten life. But I know who I am now. I am the man you saved, and I am the man who loves you more than the sun and the stars." He knelt before her in the sand. "Be my wife. Be my past, my present, and my future." Through tears of pure joy, she said yes. Their world was small, but it was perfect. A cottage by the sea, a love born from wreckage, a future as bright and as peaceful as the horizon. They were two lost souls who had found in each other a harbor. They did not know that the most powerful fleet on the seven seas was, at that very moment, turning its prow towards their quiet shore. The past was not gone. It was just late, and it was coming not just to reclaim a king, but to claim a soulmate he didn't even know he had found. Their engagement was a quiet celebration, a promise whispered between two people against the backdrop of the sea. The village of Siren's Rest, which had adopted Storm as one of its own, rejoiced with them. For a few perfect, sun-drenched weeks, the future was a thing of beautiful certainty. Elara would be a wife. Storm would be a husband. They would build a life together, a life of peace, a life blessedly free of secrets. They had no idea that Storm's entire existence was the biggest secret of all. The arrival of the Leviathan was not a subtle thing. It did not appear as a speck on the horizon. It materialized out of morning mist like a great, black beast rising from the depths. It was a ship of legend, a three-masted monster of warship, its sails the color of a starless night, its hull scarred from 100 battles. At its mast flew a flag that was a curse in every port, a roaring, silver dragon against a black field. The first fisherman who saw it dropped his net and ran, his cry of terror the first note in a symphony of panic. The name Kaelan was spoken in hushed, terrified whispers. Kaelan the Conqueror, Kaelan the Soulless, the pirate king whose cruelty was a shadow that stretched across all the known seas. His arrival meant only one thing: devastation. The villagers ran for their homes, barring their doors, their peaceful morning shattered. Elara, hearing the commotion from her cottage, ran towards the beach, her heart pounding with a nameless dread. She found Storm standing on the sand, staring at the approaching behemoth, his body as still as a statue. There was no fear on his face, only a strange, profound confusion, as if he were looking at a memory he couldn't quite grasp. "Storm, we have to hide!" Elara cried, grabbing his arm. He didn't seem to hear her. His gaze was locked on the dragon flag. "The dragon," he murmured, his voice distant. He unconsciously touched his own back, where his own unfinished tattoo lay hidden beneath his shirt. A headache, dull at first, began to pulse behind his eyes. The Leviathan dropped anchor in the bay with a roar of chains that sounded like a monster's growl, but it did not fire its cannons. Instead, a single longboat was lowered. It carried a dozen men, but one stood at its prow, a giant of man with a braided red beard and an axe slung over his back. This was Bjorn, Kaelan's first mate, a man whose loyalty had been forged in the blood and fire of 100 battles. For a year, he had refused to believe his captain was dead, steering the fleet with a single-minded purpose: to find him. As the longboat neared the shore, Bjorn raised a spyglass. He scanned the panicked, near-empty village, and then he saw him, standing on the beach, the familiar, powerful frame, the dark hair. "It's him," Bjorn breathed, his voice a prayer of disbelief and triumph. "By the gods, it's him." The longboat hit the shore and the pirates leaped out, their weapons drawn, forming a formidable semicircle. The villagers watched from their windows, certain the end had come, but the pirates did not attack. They simply stood, their eyes locked on the man beside Elara. Bjorn walked forward alone, his heavy boots crunching in the sand. He stopped a few feet from Storm, his hard, weathered face a mass of raw emotion. Then, to the utter shock of Elara, the giant pirate dropped to one knee, bowed his head in a gesture of absolute fealty. "Captain Kaelan," Bjorn said, his voice thick with a year of pent-up loyalty. "We have found you." The name struck Storm like a physical blow. "Kaelan." The headache behind his eyes exploded into an agonizing fire. He cried out, stumbling back, clutching his head as a violent, chaotic flood of images and sounds crashed through the dam of his amnesia. He was Kaelan. He remembered the feel of a ship's wheel in his hands, the roar of battle, the taste of victory. He remembered the faces of his crew, of his enemies. He remembered his name, his title, his legend. He remembered the vow that had driven him his entire life. To find the woman with the other half of his soul mark, the woman who was his destiny. And then the memories of the last year rushed in. Elara, her gentle hands, her quiet smile, the smell of her garden, the feeling of her love, a warmth he had never known. The two sets of memories collided. A war between the king and the lover, a battle for the soul of the man in the middle. He was a ruthless pirate who had built an empire. He was a gentle man who had found a home in a woman's heart. He was both, and he was neither. "Kaelan," Elara whispered, her face pale with terror and confusion. "What is he talking about?" "Storm, who is Kaelan?" He looked at her, and his eyes were no longer the calm, clear gray she knew. They were a maelstrom of pain, conflict, and a terrifying, emerging darkness. I don't know," he gasped, the lie a desperate attempt to hold on to the man he had become. "My king," Bjorn said, rising to his feet, a concerned frown on his face. "Are you wounded? What has this place done to you?" He took a step towards Elara, his eyes suddenly hard and suspicious. "What has she done to you?" "Stay away from her," Kaelan growled, the voice that came from his lips a low, guttural command. It was not Storm's voice. It was the voice of a captain. He instinctively moved to stand in front of Elara, shielding her. Bjorn stopped, recognizing the tone of command, but confused by the action. "But, Captain," she is a commoner, "we must return to the fleet. Your enemies have grown bold in your absence. Your throne is in jeopardy." Throne. The word echoed in Kaelan's mind. His duty, his legacy. He looked from Elara's terrified face to Bjorn's expectant one. He saw the life of peace he had built, and the life of war that was his birthright. And then he felt a strange, tingling heat on his back. The tattoo, the unfinished dragon. It felt incomplete. A part of him was missing. The search for his soulmate, the core of his very being, was a drive that predated his memory loss. He looked at Elara, truly looked at her, a desperate, impossible question in his eyes. Could it be her? The woman he had fallen in love with by chance. Was she the woman he had been searching for by destiny? "Show me your back," he commanded Bjorn, his voice rough. Bjorn, confused, obeyed, pulling aside his tunic. On his back was a simple tattoo of a wolf. Kaelan went to the next pirate, and the next. Tattoos of skulls, of anchors, of kraken. But none were what he was looking for. He turned back to Elara, his heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm. "Elara," he said, his voice now a plea, "let me see your skin." "What?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why?" "Please," he begged, the king and the lover united in this one, desperate hope, terrified, but seeing the raw agony in his eyes, she slowly, hesitantly, pulled up the sleeve of her dress, revealing the smooth, unmarked skin of her forearm. Nothing. It was blank. The last flicker of hope in Kaelan's eyes died. She was not his soulmate. She was just a woman he had met by accident. A beautiful, wonderful accident, but an accident nonetheless. His destiny lay elsewhere. His duty was clear. The king had to kill the lover. The light in his eyes changed. The warmth, the conflict, the love. It was all extinguished, snuffed out by a cold, hard wave of resolve. The battle was over. Rorik had won. He dropped a protective stance and took a step away from her, the small distance feeling like a canyon opening between them. He turned to face his crew, his back to the woman who had saved him. His voice, when he spoke, was as cold and as unforgiving as a northern sea. "My name is Kaelan," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "And I am your king." He turned his head, his cold gaze sweeping over Ira one last time, dismissing her, discarding her. "My business here is finished." He strode towards the longboat, his men falling into formation behind him, leaving Ira alone on the beach, her perfect world reduced to ashes at her feet. The man she loved had just been erased from existence, and in his place stood a monster of his own making, sailing away to reclaim his bloody throne. Watching Kaelan walk away was like watching the sun set in the middle of the day. The light, the warmth, the very center of her world was simply gone. He didn't look back. Not once. He stepped into the longboat and was rowed back to the black-sailed monster in the bay, leaving a silence on the beach that was louder than any storm. Elara stood there, frozen, long after the boat had disappeared, long after the great ship had raised its anchor and vanished back into the mist it had come from. She was alone again, but it was a new kind of loneliness, a hollow, aching void where a perfect love had once been. The sea had given and the sea had taken away, but this time it had taken more than just a man. It had taken her heart. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. The village, having witnessed the terrifying truth of Storm's identity, did not know how to treat her. Some looked at her with pity, others with fear and suspicion. Was she a witch who had enchanted the pirate king? Was she a traitor who had harbored him? She had saved a monster, and in their eyes, that made her monstrous too. She retreated into the solitude of her cottage, the silence now a torment. Every object a memory of the man who was no longer there, the chair he'd built for her, the wild flowers he'd picked, now wilting in a vase, his scent lingering on a blanket. She was a ghost in the ruins of a perfect life. But Kaelan's departure was not an ending. It was a prelude. A week later, a different ship appeared on the horizon. Not a pirate vessel, but a sleek, fast warship, flying the Golden Lion banner of the Imperial Navy. At its helm was a man whose name was a byword for ruthless justice, Admiral Valerius. He was the man the Pirate King had been hunting. Valerius's arrival was not a coincidence. News of Kaelan's return had spread like wildfire. The Admiral, a master strategist, had calculated that Kaelan's first move would be to reclaim his resources and his fleet. But he had also heard whispers. Whispers of a lost year, of a remote village, of a mysterious healer. And Valerius, a man who believed in exploiting every weakness, had come to investigate the source of the story. He marched into Siren's Rest not as a liberator, but as an interrogator. His Marines, clad in immaculate uniforms, were a stark, terrifying contrast to the wildness of the pirates. They were the cold, precise instruments of a different kind of cruelty. Valerius himself was a man who radiated an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. He began to question the villagers, his inquiries sharp and merciless. He wanted to know everything about the man they had sheltered. And every villager, out of fear or a desperate desire to absolve themselves, pointed to one person, Elara. Valerius and his men arrived at her cottage at dusk. He did not knock. He simply entered. He looked around the small, simple room, his eyes missing nothing. And then they landed on her. "You are the healer," he said, his voice a silken, dangerous thing. "You are the one who saved the life of a man who should have been left for the crows." Elara stood her ground, her chin held high. "I saved a man who was drowning," she replied, her voice steady. "I did not know who he was." "Did you not?" Valerius purred, taking a step closer. "Or did you fall for the romance of it all? The broken stranger, the lonely maiden, a pretty story." He circled her, his eyes cold and analytical. "Tell me everything. Every scar, every nightmare, every word he spoke. His weaknesses are my weapons, and you will provide me with the ammunition to finally put that beast down." She refused. She would not betray the memory of the man she had loved, even if that man was a ghost. Her defiance only amused the Admiral. "So be it," he said with a sigh. "I had hoped for your cooperation, but your affection for the pirate can be just as useful." He turned to his guards. "Take her," She is a pirate collaborator, a traitor to the Empire. She will be taken to the capital, where she will be made a public example of. Elara's world, which she thought could not break any further, crumbled into dust. She was being arrested, condemned for an act of compassion. As the Marines dragged her from her cottage, from her home, from the only life she had ever known, she finally understood the true, devastating cost of her love. Kaelan's return to the world had not just destroyed her heart, it was now destroying her life. She was a casualty of a war she had never wanted to be a part of. Her journey on the Admiral's warship was a descent into despair. She was kept in a small, windowless cell, the polar opposite of freedom she had known. Her spirit, which had survived the loss of her love, began to fray. The story of Elara, the healer who saved a king, was a poignant and tragic tale, a reminder that even our best intentions can lead to our deepest sorrows. It's a complex human drama, the kind we are dedicated to exploring in all its facets here on this channel. If these intricate stories of love, loss, and impossible choices resonate with you, make sure you're subscribed so you can follow this saga to its very end. Meanwhile, on the high seas, news of Elara's capture traveled fast. Ravens and spy ships carried a message across the archipelago. The Imperial Navy had captured a woman from a remote village and were calling her the Pirate King's Witch. They were parading her capture as a great victory, a sign that Kaelan's power was broken, that he could not even protect his own. The news reached Kaelan as he was rallying his fleet. He was in the middle of a war council, a king once more cold, strategic, and ruthless. When Bjorn brought him the message, he read it, and for a moment, the entire room saw the mask of the Pirate King crack. A flash of pure murderous rage, so intense it made the air grow cold, contorted his features. It was not the anger of a king whose authority had been challenged. It was the fury of a man whose heart had just been ripped from his chest. He had tried to bury thunder. He had tried to kill the gentle man and the love he represented. But in that moment, faced with the image of Elara in the hands of his mortal enemy, he realized the truth. He had not killed Thunder. He had only caged him. And that cage had just been broken. The king and the lover, his rage and his love, were no longer at war. They had just been fused into a single, terrifying purpose. He crushed the message in his fist. "Bjorn," he said, his voice a low, deadly whisper that was more frightening than any shout. "Turn the fleet around. Every ship, every man." "But, Captain," Bjorn protested, "our plan, the attack on the southern garrison." "The plan has changed," Kaelan snarled, his storm-gray eyes burning with a light that every man in the room recognized. It was the same light he had on the day he took the carnage. "Valerius want a war," he said, a slow, terrible smile spreading across his face. "He is about to get one. We are not hunting for his fleet anymore. We are going to the capital. We are going to burn his world to the ground. And I am going to get her back." The Pirate King had found his cause. And it wasn't vengeance. It was salvation. Kaelan's command sent a shockwave through his newly reformed pirate fleet. For a year, they had been scattered and directionless. In the few weeks since his return, he had been a cold, distant strategist, focused on reclaiming lost territories and re-establishing his dominance. His obsession with Admiral Valerius was a familiar one. But this was different. The fury that now radiated from him was not the cold fire of a calculated king. It was a white-hot, personal rage of a man who had been deeply wronged. The crew, who had only ever known him as a soulless, a man who cared for nothing but his war, now saw him consumed by a passion for a woman they had never even seen. It was terrifying, and it was intoxicating. The dragon had finally found a treasure he valued more than gold. The journey to the imperial capital was a masterclass in Kaelan's reborn genius. The two halves of his soul, the ruthless strategist and the man who had learned patience from a healer, were now working in perfect, deadly harmony. He did not sail a direct course. He used his intimate knowledge of the sea, the knowledge he had shared with Elara under the stars, to move like a ghost. He used forgotten channels and timed his movements with the tides, his fleet of dark-sailed ships appearing and disappearing, leaving a trail of confusion and chaos in their wake. He was not just a warrior anymore. He was a force of nature, his strategy as unpredictable as the sea itself. Meanwhile, Elara's journey was a descent into the cold, orderly heart of her enemy's world. Admiral Valerius did not mistreat her physically. His cruelty was more refined. He treated her as a guest of honor, giving her fine clothes and spacious quarters on his flagship. But she was a bird in a gilded cage, a specimen to be studied. He would dine with her every night, his conversation a relentless, probing interrogation disguised as polite inquiry. He wanted to understand the chink in Kaelan's armor. "Tell me, healer," Valerius would say, his voice a smooth, cultured purr. "What does a man like Kaelan, a creature of violence, see in a simple village girl? Did you offer him a peace he had never known, a taste of a life he could never have?" "I offered a dying man a cup of water," Elara would reply, her voice cold, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her pain. Her resilience only intrigued him more. He saw in her the same unbreakable spirit that he saw in Kaelan, and it infuriated him. He had spent his life believing that men like Kaelan were a different species, monsters that needed to be put down. But Elara's existence, her quiet dignity, suggested something else. That perhaps the monster was a man after all, a man who could love. And this, to Valerius, was the most dangerous idea of all. As they neared the capital, Valerius escalated his psychological war. He showed her the preparations for her public trial. He showed her the gallows being built in the main square. "You will be tried as a traitor, a pirate's whore," he told her, his voice devoid of emotion. "You will be a symbol, a message to all who would dare to aid my enemies. But your cooperation could change things. Tell me what he fears. Tell me what he loves. Help me destroy him, and I will show you mercy." "The man I knew feared nothing," Elara said, her gaze steady. "And the man I knew loved nothing but peace." Valerius laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Then you truly knew a ghost. Because the man who is coming for you loves only one thing, destruction. And I am going to give him a war that will satisfy even his appetite." He was right. Kaelan was not sailing for a quiet rescue. He was sailing for total war. He knew that a direct assault on the capital's harbor was suicide. So he didn't attack the harbor. He attacked the idea of the empire. In a series of lightning-fast, coordinated strikes, his fleet crippled the empire's trade routes. He seized grain ships, not for food, but to create shortages in the city. He captured merchant vessels, not for their cargo, but to send a message to the wealthy guilds that the Navy could no longer protect them. He was turning the people of the capital against their own protectors. He was laying siege not to the city's walls, but to its confidence. And in the heart of this chaos, he sent a message, not to Valerius, but to Elara. One night, a guard brought Elara her dinner. Tucked into the napkin was a single, perfect blue seashell, the same kind Storm had collected for her on the beaches of Siren's Rest. It was a promise, a declaration. "I am here. I am coming." For the first time in weeks, a spark of hope ignited in Elara's heart. He had not forgotten her. The man she loved was still in there. The shell was also a declaration of war to Valerius. He knew the shell was a message. It meant Kaelan was close. It meant his preparations were complete. The cat-and-mouse game was over. The final confrontation was at hand. Valerius moved up the date of Elara's trial. He would use her as bait, forcing Kaelan to attack on his terms. The trial was to be a massive public spectacle, held in the city's Grand Plaza. He would have his best soldiers, his entire city guard, and a legion of Marines waiting. He was setting a trap not for a pirate, but for a dragon. The night before the trial, Elara stood at the window of her tower prison, looking out over the city. She could see the plaza below, the gallows a dark skeleton against the moonlight. She was not afraid to die, but she was terrified that her death would be the spark that burned the world down, that it would be the final act that extinguished the last embers of the gentle man she knew as Storm. She clutched the seashell in her hand. It was a promise of rescue, but it was also a promise of unimaginable violence. Kaelan, anchored in a hidden cove miles up the coast, stood on the deck of the Leviathan, looking at the same moon. He held a small, crudely carved wooden bird in his hand, the last thing he had made as Storm. He was a king leading his fleet into the most desperate battle of their lives. He was a man about to risk everything for the woman who had shown him a life beyond war. He looked at the wooden bird, a relic of a peaceful dream, and then he looked at the distant, flickering lights of the capital, the heart of his rage. Tomorrow, he would find out which of his two souls was the stronger, the one who carved birds, or the one who burned cities. The day of the trial dawned cold and gray, the sky the color of ash. A grim mood had settled over the imperial capital. The shortages created by Kaelan's blockade had made the populace restless and resentful. They came to the Grand Plaza not for a celebration of justice, but for the morbid spectacle of a public execution, a distraction from their own growing misery. The plaza itself was a fortress. Valerius's marines stood in perfect, disciplined lines, a wall of polished steel and grim faces. Sharpshooters were positioned on the rooftops. Every street and alleyway leading to the square was barricaded. It was a kill box, and Elara was the bait. She was led from her prison in chains, dressed in a simple white prisoner's shift, but there was no fear in her eyes. As she walked through the silent, staring crowds, she held her head high, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She had made her peace. She would not give Valerius the satisfaction of her terror. She was a healer of Siren's Rest, and she would face her end with the same quiet courage with which she had lived her life. She was forced onto the high scaffold, the gallows looming beside her. Admiral Valerius stood at the center, radiating an aura of absolute control. He began to address the crowd, his voice amplified by a speaking trumpet, a long, self-congratulatory speech about order, justice, an inevitable triumph of the empire over the chaos of piracy. He was savoring his moment, drawing it out, waiting for the dragon to fall into his trap. He never finished his speech. It began not with a cannon blast, but with a sound, a low, rhythmic chanting, coming from the direction of the harbor. It was a sound the crowd did not recognize, but that Valerius and every soldier in the plaza knew with a primal dread. It was the sound of 1,000 pirate voices, singing a sea shanty not of revelry, but of war. And then the bells of the city's grand temple began to ring, not the cheerful chime of the hour, but a frantic, clanging alarm. Valerius's head snapped towards the temple. It was supposed to be one of his most secure lookout posts. As he watched, a new flag was unfurled from the top of the bell tower, a massive black flag with a silver dragon, visible to the entire city. That was when the chaos began. It did not come from the sea. It came from within. Kaelan had not tried to break the city's walls. He had slipped through its cracks. Over the past week, his men, disguised as merchants, refugees, and beggars, had infiltrated the capital. They had smuggled in weapons, piece by piece. They were not an army at the gates. They were a virus already inside the city's veins. The chanting from the harbor was a diversion. The real attack was coming from everywhere at once. Explosions erupted in the barracks across the city. The city guard, sent to reinforce the plaza, found themselves ambushed in the narrow streets. The crowd in the plaza, which had been a captive audience, transformed into a panic mob, their screams drowning out Valerius's orders. His perfect, orderly trap had devolved into a maelstrom of chaos. His marines, trained for formation fighting, were overwhelmed, swallowed by the tide of fleeing civilians and the ghosts that struck from the alleyways. In the heart of this chaos, Kaelan moved. He did not lead a charge. He was a whisper, a shadow. He and a small elite team, including Bjorn, had used the sewer tunnels, the city's forgotten underbelly, to emerge in a building directly adjacent to the plaza. While the battle raged below, they moved across the rooftops. Valerius, his face a mask of cold fury, saw his plan crumbling. He had underestimated Kaelan. He had prepared for a frontal assault, for a battle of strength. He was not prepared for a war of ideas, a war of chaos. But he still had his prize. The prisoner, he roared to his personal guard. Kill the prisoner. Whatever happened, he would not allow Kaelan the satisfaction of a rescue. His guards moved toward Elara, their swords drawn. But before they could reach her, a figure dropped from the sky. It was Bjorn, swinging down from a rope thrown from an adjacent rooftop, his massive axe clearing the scaffold in a single brutal arc. He was a berserker, a whirlwind of death, and he was a distraction, because in the next instant, Kaelan dropped onto the scaffold behind Elara. He was not dressed as a king. He was dressed for war in dark, practical leathers, 2 cutlasses strapped to his back. The first thing he did was cut her chains. "I told you I would come," he said, his voice low and urgent, his gray eyes burning into hers. For a moment, the world of fire and screams disappeared. There was only him, the man she loved. "You were late," she replied, a tear finally tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "The timing was perfect," he said. He pressed a small, sharp dagger into her hand. "Stay behind me." The scaffold became the eye of the storm. At one end, Bjorn held back the tide of Marines with his axe. In the center, Kaelan and Valerius finally faced each other, not as admirals or kings, but as two men whose hatred had finally brought them to the end of the world. Their duel was not a thing of strategy or finesse. It was a brutal, ugly, desperate fight to the death. Sparks flew as their swords clashed. The sound of their battle, a sharp counterpoint to the symphony of chaos below. Kaelan was a stronger fighter, but Valerius was fueled by a cold, precise rage. He knew he had lost. His career, his reputation. It was all burning with the city around him, but he could still take Kaelan with him. He feinted, a move Kaelan parried, but it was a trick. With his free hand, Valerius drew a small pistol he had concealed in his coat. He aimed it not at Kaelan, but at Elara. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. Kaelan saw the move, but he was too far away to stop it. He saw the cold triumph in Valerius's eyes. He saw Elara's eyes widen, not in fear, but in a strange, sad acceptance. And then she moved. She did not try to run. She did not scream. With the small dagger Kaelan had given her, she lunged forward, not at Valerius, but at Kaelan's sword arm, which was still raised from the parry. She drove the dagger into his arm, the pain causing his muscles to spasm involuntarily. The shot from the pistol went wide, flying harmlessly into the sky. Kaelan stared at her, his face a mask of shocked, agonized betrayal. He thought she had attacked him, but Valerius had left himself open. For that one fatal second, his attention had been on her. And in that second, Kaelan, acting on pure, honed instinct, spun and drove his sword to the admiral's heart. Valerius collapsed, a look of profound surprise on his face. His reign of terror finally over. The Marines, seeing their leader fall, broke and fled. The battle was over. Kaelan stood, panting, his arm bleeding where Elara had stabbed him. He turned to face her, his eyes a storm of confusion, and a deep, terrible hurt. "Why?" he breathed. Elara looked at him, her own face a pale mask of exhaustion and love. "Because the man I love is a king," she said, her voice shaking. "And a king must not die for a village healer. But he also must not die from a coward's bullet." She had seen the only path. She had wounded him to save him. An act of brutal, perfect love. He simply stared at her, the truth of her sacrifice slowly dawning on him. He had come here to save her. But in the end, it was she who had saved him. Not just his life, but his soul. The aftermath of the battle was not a scene of glorious victory, but of quiet, stunned disbelief. Kaelan's pirates, emerging from the alleyways and rooftops, quickly took control of the plaza. The surviving Marines and city guards surrendered, their leader dead, their will broken. The city, which had been a symbol of imperial power, now belonged to the pirate king. But the king felt no triumph. He stood on the scaffold, the body of his lifelong enemy at his feet, and felt only the searing pain in his arm and the profound, confusing ache in his heart as he looked at Elara. She had stabbed him. She had chosen to wound him to save him. It was an act of love so fierce and so selfless that his mind, which was built on the logic of violence and self-preservation, could barely comprehend it. He had come here prepared to be a monster for her, but she had shown him a different kind of strength. Not the strength to kill for someone, but the strength to suffer for them. Bjorn approached them, his face grim. "Captain," he said, his voice low, "we've taken the plaza. But the fortress is still manned, and the rest of Valerius's fleet is blockading the harbor. We want a battle, not the war." Kaelan didn't seem to hear him. He couldn't take his eyes off Elara. He saw the grime on her face, the simple prisoner's shift she wore, and he had never seen anything more beautiful or more regal in his life. He had spent his life searching for his fated soulmate, a woman with a tattoo, a woman destined to be his equal. But he had been looking for a reflection of his own power. He had been looking for another dragon. He had never considered that his soulmate might not be a creature of fire, but a gentle, unshakable sea. "The tattoo," he breathed. The words meant only for her. "It doesn't matter." Elara looked at him, her eyes full of sad, profound understanding. "It was never about the mark, Kaelan," she whispered. "It was about the soul." In that moment, a choice crystallized in his mind. He had spent his entire life defined by his past, by his quest for vengeance, by his birthright. That life had brought him nothing but pain and loss. The 1 year he had spent without a past, as a simple man in a simple village, had been the only time he had ever known peace, the only time he had ever known love. He had a choice. He could be the king who had just conquered the capital, or he could be the man who had just been saved by the woman he loved. He turned to Bjorn, and his voice was no longer that of a king or a conqueror. It was a voice of a man who was finally, truly free. "There will be no war," he said. Bjorn stared at him in disbelief. "Captain, we have the city in our grasp. The Empire is on its knees." "And what then?" Kaelan asked, his gaze sweeping over the chaos, the smoke, the fear in the people's eyes. "We become what they were? We trade one tyrant for another? I am done with thrones, and I am done with vengeance." He looked at his loyal first mate. "Take the fleet, the ships, the plunder, the reputation. It's all yours, Bjorn. You are a better leader for them than I could ever be. All I ask is for one ship, the smallest in the fleet, and safe passage out of this harbor." It was an abdication. A king, at the absolute pinnacle of his power, was laying down his crown. Bjorn, after a long moment of stunned silence, finally understood. He looked at Kaelan, and then at Elara, and he saw not a surrender, but a different kind of victory. He gave a short, sharp nod. "It will be done, my friend," he said, the word friend carrying more weight than captain ever could. The final scene is not a coronation, but a quiet departure. As dawn breaks, a small, unassuming sloop slips out of the Imperial harbor. On its deck stand 2 people. Kaelan, his arm in a sling, is dressed not in a captain's coat, but in simple, practical sailor's clothes. Elara stands beside him at the helm, her hand resting on his, guiding the ship towards the open sea. They are not a king and a healer. They are just a man and a woman, their faces turned towards a rising sun. As they leave the smoking capital behind, Elara gently traces the lines of the unfinished dragon tattoo on his back. "It feels lonely," she says softly. Kaelan turns and takes her hand, pressing it against his heart. "It was," he says, his voice thick with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "But a soul mark is not something you're born with. It is something you build, with trust, with sacrifice." He looks into her eyes, his own gray eyes finally calm, finally at peace, and with love. He leans in and kisses her, a kiss that is not passion or desperation, but of quiet, profound certainty, a promise of a future that would not be defined by destiny or by tattoos, but by the choices they would make together. The camera pulls back, showing the small ship sailing away from the world of empires and pirates, a tiny vessel on a vast, open ocean. They do not know where they're going. They only know they're going there together. The pirate king was dead. The man named Storm was a memory. But Kaelan, the man who found his soul not in a fated mark, but in the heart of a village healer, was finally, truly alive.